Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
Straight, like, hey, this is how I'm going to go about it, and this is what I'm going to attempt to achieve. Yeah, you might not have people trying to push your buttons. Usually they do that because there's something not satisfying in the relationship. And you know, in an ideal world, you can have a great relationship with each report. Now, to my other point, you could treat someone incredibly well right from the start and they still don't react well to it, in which case you're going to have to change your approach. And unfortunately that happens. But, over time, the right ones appreciate you more and more and become more and more loyal and are never leaving. And it becomes easier and easier to create a culture where, the wrong kind of energy will sort of get pushed out by the team anyway. Yeah. And when you reach that kind of culture, enjoy the ride, because that's about as good as it gets.
Well, it starts with the leader, though, right? Because the leader, like you mentioned, demonstrate. You use the word demonstrate. We're on a stage.
Oh yeah.
Let's be honest.
Oh
okay?
Yeah.
We're on a stage.
Every email.
And when you have somebody who confronts you and they're having whatever kind of a day they're having, right? But they confront you and they come at you in a way that tests you and tests your patience and the whole thing. Everybody else is watching.
Oh yeah.
They're all paying attention.
This is almost the definition of executive presence.
Yeah. They're paying attention to your facial expressions. They're paying attention to how you are with that person. They're watching everything. Okay. And it's a big deal for people to understand, if you're valid as a leader, right? Why you're valid as a leader. Okay. And some of the absolute best parents on the planet are really good leaders, because they figure out how to win with their children, and they figure out how to win with the people that they're in charge of. And to me, it's incredibly important to have that conversation, and have a conversation that's ongoing, so that you can identify what is it that they need, because it's different for everybody, right? Everybody had a different childhood growing up. Everybody had different opportunities coming up. Everybody had, you with me? And so one of the things that I found, I just had the co-founder, Jeff Hoppins, his name, the co-founder of Priceline.com on. Okay. And one of the things I was sharing with Jeff is, Jeff's a leader. Jeff is a founder. Jeff is a builder. It's what he does. And what he's doing now is he's had so much success that he's really not building companies anymore. Now he's building nonprofits. Like, he's helping to build an organization in Africa where they're providing housing. They're taking people out of mud huts and putting them in real houses.
Ah, that's amazing.
And they're showing them what, instead of third world living, what it's like to live in a right. And so and he's doing it, one by one, and he's coaching this kid to do this. And now Jeff is spending his time in schools, and he's pouring into kids that are growing up and becoming citizens. He's literally trying to have an imprint on the future. And I love when leaders get it. Like, you get it, right? Like, one of the things that you mentioned in the material that Ross sent me, and Ross is your PR rep. I love Ross. I'm one of Ross Klein's biggest fans.
Awesome.
Ross sent me sort of a rundown, and one of the things that was in the bullet points was that you teach that people don't become leaders because they have a track record of being a leader. They become leaders because of other things. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, and I have to say, actually, at this point, I don't even think is particularly original. I think a lot of people have made the observation that people get promoted into positions of leadership because they were good at something other than leadership.
Right.
They were good at sales, and so you become a sales leader. They're good at writing code, and so you become an IT leader. They are good at dealing with customer complaints, and so they become a customer success. But those skill sets are not actually necessarily congruent with what it takes to be a great leader. In fact, oftentimes when people are achievement oriented, their mindset is not well suited towards that of a coach, but rather that of a star player. And so what happens is we so often try to make Michael Jordan into Phil Jackson.
Yeah.
And Michael Jordan is not good at being Phil Jackson. God, I hope I'm not aging myself too much here, but hopefully that's still relevant. But that's sort of the inherent problem. And then we're faced with even another one, which is that even sometimes people who achieve in their given fields are great leaders. But even if they are, and that's kind of rare, what we expect of leaders nowadays is so overloaded that they don't possibly, they can't find the time to engage their teams. There's no time to lead because they're too busy having to hit numbers and solve internal problems and, deal with internal politics, deal with numbers that they have to hit, deal with strategizing, deal with change. And so we don't even give poor leaders the ability to succeed. So it's, things are a little bit broken because we have not been able to disassociate leadership from achievement. And so the more that people are achieving, the more it becomes assumed then you have to have a huge team underneath you. And somehow people who are the superstars, if they just chose to keep achieving, that somehow feels less than. And that is a tragedy. And I do think that ultimately we're going to have to see a new model arise. I'm working on one myself that when I'm ready to debut it, I will share it with you. But
you'll have to come back on.
This model does not work. And so I am working on something that I think would give us a better chance at developing the kind of healthy dynamics that we need at work if we're going to have any kind of organizational loyalty. One of the other things that I think also, I feel really badly for leaders. There used to be this thing called the psychological contract, and organizations took it upon themselves to drive employee engagement and to drive organizational loyalty and to drive employee retention through the pension programs and the benefits and the promise that, like, so long as we're making money, nobody ever gets laid off. And, so they did all of these things to provide employees with an incentive to stay there for their lives. Then they stopped doing all those things. They replaced it with nothing. And they told leaders, this is now your responsibility while you're also hitting your numbers and watch your back. And so it's, the deck is stacked. And so that's one of the other things is that when I come in to do leadership development, it's like, your job's impossible. But at least by acknowledging that to them, I do think that there's so let's talk about how we can do the best we can under these circumstances. And, that tends to be a really good way to win people over and to build credibility with them. When I tell them that they already know everything I'm going to teach them, and when I tell them that being a leader is really unfair, are 2 points in the training where it's like, I feel them be like, oh, this guy, he understands. And when I tell them some of their employees are awful, those are all the moments when it's like, you can feel in the room, like, oh yeah, they're ready. They feel me.
And it's, the deck is stacked against them and it's not getting better. It's not getting better. The fact of the matter is as we are pressing and pushing and squeezing every single dime we can out of every single dollar, right? It's it's basically incumbent on these companies. These companies are stripping away all the other things that people used to have that helped make them successful. Now it's incumbent on the leader, right? It's like, how much weight can you put on these people?
Oh, it's absurd.
Yeah,
And it's very difficult, I think, to understand how things have shifted from an economy where companies, as long as they were making money, the idea of layoffs were something they couldn't even conceive of,
right.
to where we are now, where companies can be making money and lay off employees. And it's just, that was once unthinkable.
Yeah,
And, as we evaluate how we got from there to here, I do think there has to be some reasonable evaluation of, collectively, how are we doing?
yeah.
Is this actually serving society? Is this serving our country? Is it serving us individually? And we're gonna be facing some very hard questions.
You know what I find amazing is there's this, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a trend, but there is this sort of bubbling, if you will, happening where there's a shifting to an extent where employee owned organizations are becoming a thing where
Makes
they're
sense?
a part of and a
Yeah.
partner in the success of a particular company, right? So Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts is a company that has been known for their leverage buyouts, and they've been known for their ruthlessness, and they've been known for a lot of things. Okay. Recently, there was a 60 Minutes story
It's
done.
fabulous.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a model that really investors should start embracing. And I feel like the more we hear about those types of stories, those types of, this garage door company that turn things around, and that's not the way KKR was. KKR was buy it, strip it off, break it up, sell it, make your money, on to the next one. Okay?
Right.
That was the KKR model forever. Now the model is something that is different, and my feeling about it is it's more engaging. It's an opportunity to, instead of squeezing every dime out of every dollar type, and they're still doing that to an extent, right?
Right.
But they're also coming back and saying, listen to us, what do you need? Okay? That's leadership, right? Leadership is, talk to me about how the company can win with you, right? How can we support you in a way to where we all win together? I feel like that's something that more and more investors hopefully will be embracing. More and more owners of companies will be embracing, um, and succeed with, because I really feel like that's kind of where we need to go, because what you're describing is this sort of decline, and I hope that we can stem that tide with
Mhm.
this.
Oh, I agree. So it's interesting too, if you sort of look at the last 2,000 years of economic history, and you sort of see these ebb and flows.
Mhm.
Typically things have to go. It's almost like what we were talking about earlier about trauma. It's like
Yeah,
things have to hit a certain point to
yeah,
then actually make people deal with it, and then it starts
right.
going in this other direction until it hits a point, and so I think
It's
that
a
you're right.
pendulum, right? It's
Exactly. And so I think that, because part of the problem about short-term profit maximization is that it doesn't consider what does that do to the stability of the environment in which we have to move forward.
right.
And
What's the
one of the
future look
things,
like, right?
right, one of the things that I feel like libertarianism could never answer this question is, if it's every person for themselves, what are you going to do about the fact that people who are living in extreme poverty and squalor are going to develop airborne communicable diseases that you're going to catch.
Yeah.
So if that can convince you, therefore, that there is some sense to thinking more broadly about how are my actions affecting the viability of the environment in which I need to function moving forward, even just from a P&L perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I think that also when you have more employee ownership, there's a lot of psychological studies that looks at what happens to people's brains as they acquire more positional power, acquire more wealth, and it unquestionably has an effect on everyone that goes through it. And so that's another thing that we have to also keep in mind, which is that there are a lot of psychological factors at play here, and I think the thing about the KKR example, which I think is fabulous, is that if we try to point fingers or say this was wrong or this was bad, we will never get out of it.
Yeah.
But if we can say, from that previous model, look what has emerged, and like celebrate them for allowing that kind of evolution to happen, and then partner with them in creating this kind of economic good where they're genuinely showing that actually economically this is more viable, and by the way, it's better for everyone. Why wouldn't we do this? That's the dream. And it's interesting too, like I know people who are doing research right now that can very clearly demonstrate that when the less that people are monitored at work, the more productive they become. And I think we all kind of intuitively know this, but somehow that realization gets lost as you go up the food chain. And so we need to work on creating data to demonstrate the realities of these things. Say these are bad business decisions. It's not about a moral thing. It's about what it is you're trying to build here. And having a better understanding of people is going to make you much more profitable and sustainable. And that's why just, even just a brief sort of step back to say, what is it we're trying to accomplish, and how are we trying to engage with our people to get there?
You know what's fascinating to me? What you're describing right now lacks one thing: empathy.
Right.
It's gone. It's just gone.
Yeah.
Right. And we've got to get it back. We've got to get to a place, and it's data, right? But the data, when you mix in empathy and leadership, the data will blow your mind.
Right.
The productivity will absolutely it's crazy.
Engagement, productivity, profitability, innovation, safety, retention. I mean, every metric that matters.
Yeah.
The more you start treating your employees with some humanity and benevolence, your organizational performance is transformed, and you become, what Jim Collins would call good to great. Like that's how you get there.
Exactly.
To this magical place of like, oh my gosh. And when it happens, it's the greatest thing that you can experience. But that's generally the insight where, when people start thinking of like, how do I take care of our people? I will say, and I'm not trying to just sort of toot their horn, I had a long run at ADP, and I love ADP. ADP is extraordinary. They've been around for 75 years, and they still, half of that company is trying to figure out how to treat employees better to make sure that they have the greatest organizational culture. I've never seen more emphasis on trying to be progressive, and for a 75-year-old company to be like that is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And the one thing that they sort of beat into everybody's head is integrity is everything.
Yeah.
And that is why people don't leave ADP.
Yeah.
It is this incredibly rewarding environment, and it's, I think, all because they have consistently embraced this progressive idea that the better we treat our employees, the better they're going to treat our clients, and they live it, and that's part of why they still own the market 75 years later.
It's true. Couple of questions for you, because we got way past this, and I wanted to make sure we visit it.
Hey,
So
this is like a great first
up-
date, right? Like we can't complete any thought because
I know.
every sentence
Well,
triggers
it's
17
the
others.
energy, man. You and I could run through a wall together. I mean, it's
Oh,
crazy.
man.
I love this. So So growing up, what was your favorite thing about growing up in Long Island?
So, I think that one of the things that's also complicated about my childhood is that as difficult as it was also pretty privileged.
Yeah.
And my parents also, they did a lot of really great things for us, which
Mhm.
complicated how we were able to sort of process that stuff. But like
Right.
Little League, basketball, Little League, just the, theater, like just anything, music, like the
Mhm.
opportunities to try anything and to discover anything that you liked and then really pursue it
Yeah.
were unbelievable. But it's also like, you know, that's not reality for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And so, like, I almost feel guilty acknowledging how special it was, but it also would
Mhm.
be disingenuous to not say that, maybe one of the reasons that I was able to emerge from that is because I had those things.
Yeah.
And so but I would say certainly having access to that kind of stuff for me developmentally, I think was probably crucial to who I am today.
Yeah. I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Probably my fifth grade teacher,
Mhm.
Mr. Allen,
Mhm.
who, yeah, I don't know. This guy was, I think he was in his like mid 60s. He was like a former Air Force pilot. He was like 6'6". And I always like behaved badly. I was one of these kids that was really smart and really poorly behaved. And so like
Mhm.
the principal like both loved and hated me. And so he put me in Mr. Allen's class because he knew I'd be scared, what of him. And I was.
Yeah.
But we just had some kind of spark and connection. And so um yeah, I think things really turned around for me after I developed that relationship with him. And then tragically, he died 2 years later of
Oh,
a stroke, um, which was also for me incredibly traumatic. But one of the things that I still remember and I could still choke up about is they asked me to speak at they planted a tree in his honor. And
mm,
yeah, he and I had a really special relationship. And I guess it was special to him too, because they asked me to speak. And even that, so I was probably at 13.
wow.
And yeah, and yeah, it was a really powerful experience. And I miss him.
Yeah,
Actually, I wish I could go back and talk to him again.
that's cool.
Yeah.
In high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Yeah, I'm an interesting one. I liked math because once you got it, you got it, and you didn't have
Yeah,
to do any more thinking. And
right.
didn't really want to do more thinking. Like I wanted to think about, basketball or girls.
Yeah.
Um,
Welcome to high school, right?
yeah, right. But probably the second most influential teacher was my 11th grade English teacher, Mrs. Lawrence,
Yeah.
who, so, that was when it occurred to me that like, oh, I think I might be good at writing and I think I might
Mhm.
really like it. And so when I got to college, I was writing lyrics to songs and I would send them to her and she would give me feedback on them. And I remember one of the things that I loved about her was I sent her this song and, everybody around me was like, this is amazing. You're a genius. And I sent it to her and she's like, dude, all you did was you just strung out some pretty words. This doesn't mean anything. Like anything you tell me this means is hogwash. You just are like throwing out nice images. Like, come on,
Wow.
you can do better than
Wow.
that.
Wow.
Oh shit. And she was totally right. Totally right. And but the extent to which that is now in my writing, who knows? It's
Yeah.
impossible to say. So yeah, I loved her too.
So she's echoing in your mind.
Oh, I think she's packed in. She's in my DNA already. Yeah,
I
for a
love
long time.
that.
I mean, this is
So
yeah.
you graduate from high school and you decide to go to college. Where do you go to college and why?
Cornell, because the opportunity to go to an Ivy League was That was a big, you must do this or your life will end
Mm-hmm.
of thing for where I grew up. And I just went to Cornell visit and I fell in love with it. I had, so one of my really good friends who was a year ahead of me, we played basketball together, went to Cornell. And so I went and stayed with him and I ended up joining his fraternity. And like,
Cool.
I just got there and I was like, oh, this place is for me. I'm a mountains guy too. Like
Yeah.
something about being in the mountains makes me feel very comfortable and they're soothing for me. And so Ithaca is a magical, magical place. So I'm delighted I chose that. And I studied economics, and it was a real challenge, and I evolved a lot over the course of that, but evolved with some. I'm really proud of what I was able to figure out in college by the time I got out into the world.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
After Cornell, where did you go?
So this is where I started getting really lucky. There's a pretty famous company now in the right circles called D.E. Shaw and Company.
Mm-hmm.
They started out as a quantitative trading firm in the 90s. They were one of the first. David Shaw is one of the originators of quantitative trading, which meant that he wrote algorithms that were able to spot arbitrage opportunities all over the world. And so he had this tiny startup that sometimes was responsible for up to like 2 or 3% of the New York Stock Exchange daily volume, because they would just trade for fractions of pennies all day long. And then eventually other people would copy the software to catch up. And then, you always have to evolve.
Yeah.
But this is where Jeff Bezos worked when he came up with Amazon.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. And in fact,
world.
I played shortstop. He played third for a softball game at D.E. Shaw.
Wow.
But yeah. So anyway, they were hiring for the mailroom, entry-level graduates. They had ridiculously high standards you had to hit just to get an interview to be in the mailroom. But they were advertising the New York Times want ads. And I got in there and I'm charming. And they were like, we like this guy. And I somehow got hired as the 101st employee at D. Shaw and Company. And when you get hired into the mailroom, the reality is they're like, we're just going to hire some smart liberal arts kids and we'll assess them when they're working here and then decide where to put them. And so after about 3 months, they sent me off to London to learn how to become a market maker of Japanese equity warrants.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary experience, but it also was the first sign for me that I wasn't who I thought I was.
Yeah.
If I was who I thought I was, then making money was what mattered, which meant I would ride this out and retire at 35 or 40.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who I thought I was. And after doing it for a year, I realized that is not who I am.
Right.
And that was an important moment of self-discovery.
Yeah. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay. Did you go to NYU at some point?
Yeah, so I had 2 gigantic career adventures after D.E. Shaw and Company. One was Juno Online Services, which is also born at D.E. Shaw and Company.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of an Internet 1.0 company. And this is where I learned that I'm a salesperson and that I'm a deal maker and that I'm a leader. This is where I grew up. And Juno was an incredible opportunity and a big success. There's the documentation of the achievements of when we finally went public. But then again, and I loved Juno until we went public. And then, we hit our numbers for 6 consecutive quarters, but I suddenly felt like my life was a hamster wheel. And it was not like it was in the early days of like, can we make this thing work? And so left Juno. And then, it's more time than we have, but I then ended up owning and operating a 20,000 square foot music venue on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles called the Vanguard.
Wow.
For 10 years, I employed 150 people. And this is where I really honed my leadership chops.
No kidding.
Owned that for a decade. The stories are amazing. Sold it. And then when I was 40, I was like, all right. And the quick story is this. When I was training my security guards, I had this epiphany that I was doing the same thing as when I was training my salespeople at Juno. I was just trying to get them to care. If my operations were sufficiently well designed, they'd be easy enough to follow. And therefore, all I had to do was to get people to care. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And this is when the whole idea of learning the names of things started to kind of gel in my head. And I read some Adam Grant research. And I was like, oh, this is for me. And so that's when I went back to NYU and I got my master's in IO psychology. And that taught me the names of things. And since then, it has completely transformed my professional life, because I now have the ability to talk about these things that I and everyone else have sort of known unconsciously, but didn't necessarily have it was just sort of right beyond our consciousness. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is to get it into all of our consciousness.
Yeah, and it's working. You're certainly in mine.
Thank you.
Okay, if somebody wants to work with you, how can they reach you?
Oh gosh, on LinkedIn, I am active, I'm posting, and I will be really happy to respond to any requests and talk about the different ways that I might be able to help.
Beautiful. Jordan, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I have loved every second of this.
Likewise, like I said, it's one of the best first dates I ever had.
Yeah, you're awesome, buddy. Thanks again.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.